A really common question I get asked is from people shooting their first wedding. They want to know what lenses they should get, what are good wedding lenses. So I'm going to open this question up a little bit more and say, what gear do you need to have? And I'm going to separate it into two sections. Firstly, the must-haves, and then secondly, the nice-to-haves. Now in the must-haves, beyond all the batteries and memory cards and having a bag to carry stuff around in, you're going to need a camera and another camera. You definitely need two cameras. You can't shoot a wedding with one camera because cameras do break, and you must have a backup camera. I say this pretty much every wedding related video I do, but you need two. You absolutely do. Do not shoot a wedding with one camera, it's really irresponsible. Now I have 5D Mark IIIs, you don't need that, but that's my personal preference. I like the cameras a lot. I upgraded from the Mark IIs because of the dual card slots, so I can back up as I go to two cards. I don't have the 5D Mark IVs because they don't really offer enough for me to upgrade to that. The Mark IIIs do me well. I would say while you should have good camera bodies, having the absolute best is not a necessity. When you spend money on a camera, it will decrease in value as technology gets better. This is not the case with lenses. They retain their value a lot better. So I would invest money in that area. But two cameras, you need them. Another essential thing you need are flashes. You really need those because sometimes you can control the light, sometimes you can't, sometimes the light is rubbish. Flashes are really, really important. So when it comes to lenses, you're going to need something that is reasonably wide but not too wide, and reasonably long but not too long. My personal preference is the 35mm for the reasonably wide end and the 85mm for the reasonably long end. I find those two complement each other very well. I could shoot a whole wedding with just these two. That one works well for group shots, it works well for full body portraits, for sort of torso up portraits. It works well to sort of get in on the action, to get wider shots of venues. The 85 is good for candid shots, it's good for tighter in portraits, it's good for getting that little bit closer up to people without them really noticing. But not everyone likes primes. I like primes, but some people like zooms, and a good zoom is the 24-70. Now the 24-70 is a popular one among wedding photographers. It does pretty much the same as that. 70 kind of near enough 85 reasonably. So he does that end. 24 even wider than 35, so you can get some nice wide shots with that. It's a good range to have. I would recommend always having a backup. So if you've got two lenses, I would recommend having maybe something like a 50 with the 24-70. A 50 is a good portrait lens because it's sort of halfway in between these two. So it's a kind of all-rounder portrait, kind of best of both worlds. And with a prime, you'll get a wider aperture so you can isolate your subject a lot better than you will be able to with a zoom. Although a 24-70 will be able to shoot decent portraits, and sometimes people like to have a longer lens, like a 70-200 or a 70-300 as I've got in this case. So 24-70 and a 70-300 gives you every focal range from 24 up to 300. It's down to personal preference. There's pros and cons. And the last essential thing is a tripod, and you need a tripod for group shots, and I'll explain why. Now, portraits are fine if you've got enough light handheld, but when you're doing group shots, it's very, very difficult to get everyone to look at the camera at once, especially if you've got younger kids and things in the shots. It's just, even with adults, it's very, very difficult to get them to all look at the camera at the same time, or to all not be blinking. It's a nightmare, basically. The more people you've got, the more difficult it is. So with a tripod, what you can do is you can set up a shot, you can just take loads and loads of shots. Because you've got the camera in a static position, you can very easily cut stuff out in post and paste it over. So you can do head swaps where people aren't looking, where people are blinking, pulling a slightly funny face, and you've got an otherwise good shot. Because the chances are you're not going to get one shot where everyone is looking their best. I would say that covers the basic essentials. You need this kind of focal range to shoot a wedding. But there's also some nicer things to have as well. So for me, with my 35 and 85, I also have a 16-35 for the wider end and 135mm for the longer end. Now this gives me that little bit of extra reach than the 85, so I'll use that in maybe ceremonies where I can't get close to people. It's an f2 lens, this one, which gives you really nice shallow depth of field, and the quality of the photos from this prime is, they're just so punchy and lovely. The colours and contrast is just fantastic. Now, if I know the venue is going to be slightly bigger, maybe I'm going to be slightly further away, I'll probably switch that out for the 70-300. This gives me a lot longer focal range, so 300 obviously a lot longer than 135, but the quality of this one you don't really get with this one. You get close, but it's good enough, but that one gives you some really magic photos, so I prefer this one where I can. If I had to pick just 3 lenses, I'd say these 3, but the 16-35 is a nice addition as well because it has that wide, crazy look to it, where you can really get some energetic dancing shots. I'll use a flash, I'll do a slow sync, and I'll get right up in people's faces, really wide shots. You get these kind of crazy shots where all the movement is really exaggerated because you've got such a wide lens. You can also get some nice establishing shots of the venue, some really wide shots of any landscapes. And because it goes up to 35, that's not too wide, so sometimes you just switch up to that one if you've got it on your camera and you quickly need to get a more normal looking shot. You can get away with that with 35, so it's a good lens, this one. I find since I've got it, it's added a certain dynamic to my sets of photos. So that's kind of a top level overview from my perspective of what I think is essential for weddings and what is kind of nice to have and quite helpful for weddings. And one thing to remember is that while it's nice to have loads and loads of gear, you do have to carry it around with you, and so you have to be really selective. So you have to find that little bundle of lenses that works for you, because most of the time you're going to be running around after people, especially if you have a wedding that's traveling around to different venues. I mean, you can keep bigger stuff in your car or whatever if you're driving, but when you're just following people around, things happen, you know, like that. You don't get warned about things happening. The cake cutting suddenly happens. People suddenly want a portrait. The first dance just suddenly gets announced and you have to sort of be ready. So you need to have everything with you. You need to have all the essential stuff with you. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. So just a quick note for those of you who are asking how I edit my photos. I've made a little Lightroom preset pack that you can download. The link is in the description below. I've created some film stock emulation as well as some geared toward architecture and some geared a bit more towards weddings. I've also made a video where I run through using these presets.